Hey, my name is Cordell, and today we're going to talk about how to get more articulation and clarity out of your drums in Ableton Live so that you can go from flabby to not too shabby. Let's get into it. Articulation. Okay, so as you can see here, I've got a drum rack set up. It's just a bunch of live drum one-shots from one of my sample packs that you can find in the description below. And the only one that is layered is this kick. I've got a kick that's got a hi-hat on top. And as you can see, this is a recording that you heard at the top. It's very not articulate, very busy. So what we're going to do is make it more articulate. We're going to shave it down and make sure that everything speaks with its own space. So the first thing that I'm going to show you is these flags here at the end. You can actually use these to adjust the end of a sample, right? So for example, this hi-hat can go from this to this. See, already way shorter. So we're going to go through, this is my snare. We're going to go through and just use this flag, drag it on over. And now you can see that tail end is now gone. Same with this little ghost snare. I'm going to go through and just drag the tail over a little bit. Right. Same with this guy. I don't need all of this tail for the articulation that I want. So I'm going to move this over. Cool. So now what you'll notice, that was tip number one, but now you'll notice that it ends very abruptly. It's kind of jarring. And it just stops. So tip number two is that you can use this fade out knob right here to make sure that even though you're adjusting the ends of this, that it ends a little bit more smoothly, even though we're going for that quick articulation. So listen to the difference between this snare and a nice little fade out. We could probably even make it a little shorter as well. See how it just ends a little bit more naturally? We'll do the same thing for the hi-hat. It just sound naturally decays. So this is adding that decay so that sounds rarely just end really abruptly in real life. So it makes it sound more natural. Same with this one. That one doesn't sound too terrible, but let's just make it tighter anyway. Oh yeah. See how much more articulate and poppy that sounds? Same with our kick. We're going to make sure we get all of that stuff out there. All right, it's already sounding a lot tighter, a lot more articulate, but there's a few more tips that I'm going to give you. Another one, if you're having trouble dialing in the tail and the fade out and all of that stuff, what you can do is go to warp mode. There's a bunch of warp modes. I could do a tutorial on these another time, but we're going to go into beats, and we're going to preserve transients. That's the default, so that's totally fine. The mode here, what this means is the slice that it's making. If you have it on these back and forth arrows, that means if it's looping, it'll just kind of go back and forth. So it'll start at the beginning of a sample, go to the end, and then reverse this way. This one, it'll start at the beginning of the sample, it'll go, and then start from the beginning again and go. But what we want is this mode. This is when it gets to the end of the sample, it stops. And we're looking for articulation. So that's what we're looking for. So once you've chosen that, then you've got this envelope number, which is basically how long of a sample you want. So I'm going to open this up just a little bit so you can see what I mean. 100 is as big as it gets. Pretty similar to what we had. But you'll notice if you start to bring this envelope down, when it's on this one-shot transient mode, it gets a lot tighter. And it's a great way to control your transients, which is really all we're doing. See how much nicer that sounds? Listen to that. Versus, right? So much chunkier. Let's do the same thing to this snare. Warp mode, beats, transients, one-shot mode, and then dial the envelope back. All these things work outside of a drum rack as well, by the way, but we're just drumming, so we're going to stick inside the drum rack. Nice. Same with this guy. Beats, transients, one shot, dial it back a little bit. That might be a little too much for my taste. Boom. Get it. All right. Next tip that I'm going to give you is we'll stick with this ghost snare that we have right here. We're going to go up into this control panel over here, which has a whole bunch of fun stuff. The one that's going to be interesting to us right now is this pitch envelope. We're going to turn this on. And now this envelope controls the pitch of the sample. So we can do the attack, decay, sustain, and release of how the pitch is affected. It's the amount here is how many semitones it's going to affect the pitch. And so we need to turn that up if we want it to do anything. The sustain we can put down to 0, which means it'll sustain back to the original. So the main things that you're going to be concerned with in this pitch envelope is going to be the amount, because that's important for it to work, and then the attack and the decay. Since we're going for articulation right now, we're going to try to get a really tight decay. And the reason this helps with articulation is because since the pitch is being bent up, since I went positive, that means more of the sample is going to be played sooner, which essentially means the sample is shorter, which is exactly what we're going for in this articulation. So let's hear how the snare sounded before pitch. Now let's hear how it sounds with it. Much tighter and poppier. It's obviously a lot higher. If it's too high for you, you can dial it back. But for ghost snares, I like it to be a little higher, a little poppier. You can dial in the decay, the attack. See, now that the attack is there, it's the sample starts off without the pitch envelope. So I usually like to keep the attack at 0. Nice tight decay. Yeah, that sounds a lot nicer. Cool. So let's hear how it sounds now. Cool. A couple more tips for you. Next one is inside this control panel again. In addition to this pitch envelope, we also have a filter over here. You turn the filter on with this button. And you have this frequency section right here, which shows you this map of the filter cutoff. But if you click right here, you can actually see a whole filter envelope. Boom. If you click this, it'll turn it on. And just like the pitch envelope, you have to adjust the amount, like how much this envelope is going to affect your sample. So for our sakes, we're just going to slam it all the way up. And let's hear how just this snare sounds with and without the filter envelope. So without, with. So you can hear already the filter's kind of like pew, bringing it down. That kind of resonance is going to come from this knob. You can hear it's like pew. So turning that all the way down will take care of that. And just like before, our real concern is the attack and the decay with these for articulation. This is how big the curve is, which you can see. You can switch back and forth between frequency right here. Yeah, as you can see, even though the envelope is taking care of a lot of the frequencies, it still doesn't really give it a lot of brightness. So I'm not sure I'm going to use this on the snare, but there's some instruments where this can be really helpful. So just keep that one in your back pocket. All right, I got a couple more tips for you. So let's hear how it sounds all together. Cool. This next one is going to be huge. We're going to hit Command F to search. We're going to type in drum bus. This is available in Ableton 11. I believe it's available in Ableton 10. And if you're running on something earlier than that, you can just get what we call a transient shaper. So this is Ableton's native transient shaper. This drive is basically just like any other drive. It just pushes it a little bit and adds a little bit of saturation. Crunch is essentially another type of saturation, which is really helpful. This boom actually does the opposite of articulation, where it will add a bunch of tail, a bunch of boomy tail, kind of make like an 808 type deal, which is kind of interesting, but not what we're going for today. That's a tip for another day, but for us right now, we're going to turn the boom all the way down and this decay all the way down. The damp is essentially a little filter, and we don't really need that filter right now, so we're going to leave that all the way up. And this is all we really care about right now. This is our transient shaper. So if you turn this down, it'll make our transient tighter and smaller. And if you turn this up, it'll make our transient bigger and more aggressive. And keep in mind that transient is just this first hit, right? It's like the first attack, the first kind of little pop that comes out of any sound. So let's hear how it sounds without this drum bus. With this drum bus, so as you can see, the transient, that first attack, got a lot more aggressive. So if you want to dial the transient back, this will make it more poppy. But But sometimes it's actually nicer to bring the transient up a little bit more so that that first hit is articulated even more. In this case, for articulation's sake, I think I'm going to dial the transient back a little bit. See how it's a little bit flubbier before that, and now with the transient shaper, it's got up more like, cool. So I actually want to option drag this onto the snare. Snares also really benefit from transient shaping. Let's hear it with and without the transient shaper. See how much of a difference this makes? So much more articulate. All right, let's hear how this sounds. You can put transient shapers on your hi-hats if you want to, and your ghost snares. I tend to kind of leave those alone because the kick and the snare are the most important parts, musically speaking, in a lot of cases. So we're going to make sure that those are the ones that pop the most. So let's hear how it sounds now. Nice. So much tighter. And you can go as crazy as you want with this. You can get really, really, really tight. Cool. I'm going to give you one last tip, and then we're going to be done for the day. This last one is really crucial because it kind of glues all of these things together. And if you caught my hint, you probably know what it is. It's called a glue compressor. Now, glue compressors are really, really nice for just taking a bunch of different sounds and compressing them a little bit so that they stick together, they hang together a little bit better. But in our case for articulation today, this attack is going to be really helpful. So the threshold is how much, where the compressor is going to start kind of bringing things down and compressing it. But the attack tells us how long until it starts bringing some of the frequencies down. And so what that means is if we have a long attack, our transient will come through and then the compressor will push everything down. So what this does is essentially makes our transients feel a little bit more present, right? And then if everything gets too quiet, the makeup gain will just turn it up. So you want to make sure that you're getting this dialed in without just making it super loud in the makeup gain, because that might trick you into thinking it sounds better. But really what we're going for is the transient to come through with this attack, and then this threshold to make everything else a little quieter. So let's hear it without the glue compressor and with the glue compressor. So you want to bring this down until our meter actually starts to get some signal in it. So notice when I bring the attack all the way down, the whole thing feels kind of flat. But as we make this attack a little bit louder, that initial transient cuts through really, really well. So I'm going to bring this back to like 10. And then the more you push this down, the more everything besides the transient will actually go down in volume. And then from there, you can turn up the makeup gain a little bit. Nice. And now this whole thing sounds gorgeous. Thanks so much for watching. If you really want to use some of these samples yourself, check out the link in the description below. And if the video is helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe and share with all your friends.